Hello and welcome to our podcast today. We're glad that you could join us, and some of you are joining us from around the world. So, welcome, and we hope you enjoy our podcast today. We're very excited. It's Happy Wednesday. We've got a great conversation that we're going to be having today, and I'm really excited to have two great personal and business coaches join me, Cristina Costa and Bedilia Ramirez, who are going to be joining us, having our conversation today. So, welcome, both of you. It's great to have you on today. Our conversation today is a broad topic. And what we would like to do is stay within the hour and give everybody an opportunity to ask their questions and put them in the chat so we can keep track of them. But also, what we want to do is give everybody about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes towards the end, so we can all, well, you folks can answer the questions and give the people your perspective. So, for those joining us on the podcast today, we're going to talk about personal stories around the imposter syndrome and how it is impacting organizations today, how it is very prevalent in organizations today. And both Cristina and Bedilia can share their personal experiences so that you can learn and understand what they have experienced and how they managed through it. So, to bring us all onto the same page, because this is a broad topic, we're going to focus on imposter syndrome in the workplace. And so, Bedelia, if you could just start off by sharing with us how you would describe imposter syndrome, how you've experienced it. Uh, Share with us what has happened to you. And also, is it more common in women than it is in men?
Uh, Good question. Thank you for having me on, Clifford. So I think for me, I recognize imposter syndrome. I didn't realize there was a word for it, but it's that feeling in your gut where you start doubting yourself, even though you've gone to school, even though you've worked hard to be where you're at. Um, I remember feeling this way when I started grad school and just being in the room with other adult students. And at points, I would ask myself, like, what am I doing here? Like, how can I contribute to the conversation? And
Right.
my good friend, shout out to Robert Gutierrez, who is now a communications instructor. Um, he told me, we belong here. We worked hard for this. Like, you were selected to be here.
Hmm.
So for me, it's really that gut, when you're all of a sudden in your brain, you get that, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? Come up. Um, and you kind of forget everything that you've done to be there. You're kind of like, I was here because of luck or chance. And the truth is, that's not always the case. But that's my definition. I'll turn it over to Christina.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I agree. I'll go ahead and give my definition, which is very similar. So for me, I like to break it down. So first and foremost, the word imposter, right? Imposter means fraud, right? Being a fraudulent, like you
Yeah.
don't belong. So
Yep.
for me, the imposter syndrome is, again, that gut feeling that you feel that you just don't belong, that you are not meant for this space or this position or this responsibility or whatever it is that you're doing. In this case, we're talking about the workplace. So mainly it comes up for women, and especially for me in the workplace when it came down to making decisions, especially. Because in a lot of the spaces that I've inhabited, again, I come from a tech background. I've been working in the technology sector since 2014. And so for me, number one, tech is very predominantly male
Yeah.
dominated and
Absolutely.
especially white male dominated. And so coming in as a Latina woman in a lot of the tech companies I've worked at, I've been the only one. I've been the only one who looks like me. I've been the only one who speaks Spanish, the only one who maybe has a different life experience than a lot of other people in my group. So for me, it was feelings of not belonging, of am I worthy of being here? Do I belong? And again, self-doubt would come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the imposter syndrome really is feelings of not belonging, of exclusion and self-doubt that a lot of women, especially women of color, feel in the workplace, because most workplaces, especially, in finance and technology, anywhere that you can make a good amount of money, uh, to be honest, is not designed for people like me, to feel comfortable and to feel uh, autonomy, that I can make decisions for myself. So imposter syndrome for me is a feeling of lack of confidence, of self-doubt, but most importantly, feelings of exclusion. So that for me is what the imposter syndrome is.
That's heavy. Like you're not only working your way through your career,
Mhm.
and you're in an environment that is not welcoming, or not that's not really the right word, but you are suddenly thrust with these feelings of not belonging. And regardless of what's going on in your personal life, that's just a lot to have to manage in your in your workplace. And hats off to you. I think it's a fantastic that you both have been able to navigate through this, and we're going to hear today some examples or ideas or processes that you put in place to help manage it better. But I think I'd like to just also ask a little bit of a question around, you felt you had these feelings in your workplace. Could you share a little bit more about specifics and how it manifested itself? Did people say things, or did people act a certain way, or was there things that occurred that you that increased this feeling of imposter syndrome in the workplace?
Well, I mean, I can start
Yeah.
to Christina's point. Like, I've pivoted. I was working in higher education and I also worked in nonprofits. And for me, I think what I recognize as a woman of color, as you move up in the ranks and come into spaces where you're working with other managers, um, I think what I see happening is there's a certain style of leadership that is enforced in many companies, and it's really white, male, cis, straight. This feeling that if you're a leader, you have to rely on data, um, you have to speak a certain way. And what I found in certain circumstances, for example, when I had my first role in tech, was I was referred to the job because someone I knew referred me and was like, you could do this job as a contractor. But somehow that environment, to Christina's point, didn't reflect anywhere I'd been before. And there wasn't someone there that looked like me who could kind of walk me through the process. And I think what happens is when you have these feelings of imposter syndrome as a woman of color, you start thinking, wait, why am I here? I don't understand. How does my experience relate? And the truth is, it's just a different structure.
Mhm.
You
Hmm.
can totally do the job. And when I'm
Yeah.
coaching candidates, this is what I find, that a lot of them are like having these conversations. And it's when managers say things like, um, don't you understand? Or what is it
Yeah.
about this that you don't understand? Am I not being too specific? Where the blame is shifted on you and you're
Yeah.
made to feel like, why aren't you getting this? When the part is, it's not an inclusive environment and they're not taking into account that your experiences fit into here.
Hmm.
And there's different ways of modeling how to do the job. And for me, I'm the type of person where I ask questions. So just to be honest with those job seekers out there, like, there's nothing wrong with asking questions, but I feel like as women of color, we always feel like we have to know it. We work so
Mhm.
hard. And the truth is,
Right.
not
Right.
everybody knows it. Like, I really hate when people say fake it till you make it, because I feel for some of
Yeah.
us, that's a really, like, performance. We've been performing our whole lives, and why can't we
Yes.
be our authentic selves? So for me, that's the way I've seen it displayed, where there's this certain style of leadership that we have to follow. And you can be soft, you can be direct, you can be inquisitive, But in certain spaces, it's actually frowned upon, and
It
it's
is.
turned on you to
Yep.
make it seem like, why don't you know better? And it's like, wait a second, like, we don't know all the answers. Let's make this space inclusive so people can ask questions and advance.
But I think that's true. That's been a style in the workforce for many, many, many years. So, not pointing fingers at whoever it was that portrayed that style, that has been around, dating back to
Yeah.
industrialization and into the 40s and the 50s. And I see over the years, without disclosing my age, that has shifted uh, quite a bit in the sense that um, managers are being, forced to have to speak differently and recognize that this is not a organizational structure where you come to work and you keep your mouth closed, which is what we've generally been operating under. It's an organization or a workplace that encourages questions and respects how people act and respects where they come from and takes all of that into consideration rather than, as I was raised as a child, uh, to be seen and not heard.
Mm. Yeah.
So, if you could, Christina, share a little bit of maybe how
Yeah.
you experienced it in the workforce, in the
Yeah.
workplace, that would be great.
Yeah. So I come from a very unique background. I will share a little bit of context that the imposter syndrome hasn't necessarily stifled me. Actually, it motivated me. So I'm very opposite in the sense
You're an
that
anomaly.
I'm an anomaly. So for me, um, after college, so I graduated I'm dating myself, graduated in 2009 in the height of the recession. There were no jobs. Like all my friends in college ended up going to grad school because they were like, I guess I gotta go to grad school because there are no jobs. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I took a different route and I ended up working abroad. My
Oh,
first job after college was actually in Japan. I moved to
oh
Tokyo,
my
Japan by
gosh.
myself, not knowing absolutely
Anything.
anybody. I spoke some of the language. I had studied
Oh,
for
okay.
5 years,
That was
luckily. So
good.
it was always an interest of mine to go there. But I went by myself to a country that I don't know if you all know, but Japan is the most homogeneous country in the world.
Yep.
So it's 99.9% Japanese people.
Yep.
And I'm definitely not Japanese. So I think I already came into this role back in 2009. No one looked like me.
Mhm.
No one looked like me in my town where I lived. Okay. So
Everywhere you went, you stood out.
exactly. So I would get stared at all the time. People would follow me at the gym, at the supermarket. They would want to know what I'm buying. Like it was a very unique experience. I survived that for 2 years. Um, and
It's a
so I
long
think
time.
it is. So I think after going through that and where I really wasn't one of the pack, right? And I always stood out. I think coming back to the US with that mentality of like, I'm going to create my lane,
Hmm.
whether you like it or not, came from was stemmed from that experience. And obviously previous experiences as well. I went to Boston College, which is a predominantly white
Exactly.
institution, and a lot, not only white, but very well-to-do, wealthy students, and I was
Hmm.
not, right? So I already kind of experienced throughout my college years feeling othered and different. And I, again, used that to really charge myself in creating those spaces.
Hmm.
So even in Japan, you know, yes, I felt excluded a lot of times. Yes, I got stared at all the time, but I ended up finding my community and building it and really being that person that brought everyone together. And so I had Japanese friends and I had American friends. I had Australian friends. I had friends from all over the world, right? And I created those spaces for us to get together and just enjoy and share. So when I went into the technology sector, my first role was actually at PayPal. And similar to Bedilia, I had a referral. It's the only reason I was hired. I know that for a fact. Um, this friend of mine, she worked at PayPal and she was the only Black woman at PayPal. She referred me, and when I was hired, I was the only Latina in the entire office.
Yep.
So already I felt excluded. Like, okay,
Mhm.
wow, there's no one here that looks like me. And this is a global company, right? Like this is
Mhm.
like PayPal is all over the world, right? And super international, and it just wasn't represented there. So I felt the imposter syndrome or just self-doubt as soon as I joined. And my manager, and I say this with as much sincerity as possible, but a lot of managers are just not meant to be managers. A lot of managers should not manage people. They might be great at managing portfolios or accounts or clients, but not necessarily building and developing and supporting other people. So my manager, was a white man. He did not support me in the way that would have really helped my development in the role. It was my first role in tech. And again, as the only Latina woman, I felt that I was very much left to kind of fend for myself. And so, yes, feelings of imposter syndrome came in and a self-doubt because I didn't have that support from him. And to be honest, he would be very, what's the word I'm looking for? He was not very kind in his delivery when things didn't go as well as he thought they should be.
Yep.
Right. And instead of saying, hey, how can I support you? How can I train you better? Like, what can I do to help develop these skills so that you can do this the way that I'm looking for you to do this? Instead, he would say more like, well, you're not performing to the extent that I'm expecting you to perform. Exactly. Without giving me any type of structure, any type of training, any type of support. And so, when I ended up leaving that role, which funny enough, 6 months in, I got laid off. And so I've been through it all. I've been through the gamut. It was 6 months into my first tech role. I was laid off because at the time PayPal bought themselves out from eBay. So they laid off like 3,000 employees or something like that. So I was on chopping block, right? I left. But then I transitioned into another role at another tech company where I'm a very outspoken person. I believe in saying what is right. I believe in advocating for people and advocating for employees. And I was seen as the spicy Latina at the next place that I was at. And I know for a fact that if I was a white man, or maybe even a white woman, I wouldn't have been perceived that way.
Sure.
I wouldn't have been perceived as like a threat, or I don't know, what they look at it as. But, that actually propelled me to create and be the founder of the first employee resource group at that tech company, which still exists to this day. So something I'm very, very proud of. So I used these feelings of lack of support and exclusion to actually fuel me to create the spaces where people can feel included in the workplace. And that's work that I continue to do now to this day, because I know how important it is for people, especially employees of color, especially women of color, who face not just one glass ceiling, but two, right? We face the glass ceiling of one, just being a person of color in a
Not being a man.
Exactly.
And then not being a man, right? So like we have double the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And so I know how important it is to create those spaces where people can find some support, where they can find some psychological safety, and where they can get some validation that what they're doing is that they are meant to be here. Right.
Well, I think what you find
Go ahead.
I think what you find, Cristina, is when you do create those spaces, other women will actually say, hey, this is what I feel. And I think specifically when we talk about women of color, like some of us have like this stigma that, oh, if we say something, people are going to say, oh, she's just being angry, or she's going to use the race card. And, I've been called combative. I've been, people have mentioned that, oh, your tone. And I honestly wasn't doing anything out of context. I was just expressing my opinion, but I think it's because we follow these norms of what leadership looks like and how does that look like? So for me, to Christina's point, like, it's always good to have someone to bounce ideas off of. Like, I know Cristina personally, and I think sometimes
you're
will
not
get
combative
offended.
at all, Bedilia. You're
But
like
I-
the calmest person I know. So I'm like, for someone to say you're combative is great. Like, I'm a little combative. I'll say that.
but
You're
I
not.
feel like it's that inclusive space,
Yeah.
right? Like when we communicate, people communicate differently. So my
Yep.
background is I majored in anthropology. I specifically grew up in California, which I feel like is so different
Yeah.
than the Northeast, where I actually had great bosses that were white and male who really advocated for me to talk and share my ideas. So when I moved to the Northeast, I think I saw like, oh, I can see why, there's spaces where people don't feel included. I
Hmm.
remember I had one mentor, one job I took here in New York City. He was like, look at it as a seat at the table. And that's why I always encourage women. You're not probably going to always find an ally that looks like you. It
Hmm.
may look like Clifford. And I
Mhm.
think to be open to the fact that anyone that's willing to vouch for you when you're not in the room, that's a huge plus.
Yes,
Another
exactly.
thing I encourage women to do is have your own Brad book.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
we sometimes you have to kind of look at what's fact and what's an opinion. And
Hmm.
sometimes we have to sit there, and I've done this exercise. Like some of us have fears, like, I think I can't do this job. And it's like, why? Let's talk about it. I talk about it with job seekers. I remember one job seeker was like, I think people are going to question my age. And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. How many people have brought up age in an
Yeah,
interview?
yeah,
She's like, never. And I'm like,
yeah.
so this
This
is
is
something you're
you
not
worry
making
about.
me. This is something
Yeah.
you're keeping top of mind. But
Exactly.
I think one of the key things is having someone that can ground you in reality and be like, how many of these things that you're saying are true?
Mhm.
Because you'll probably realize none of it is true and you are capable of it. But you got to have, I think we kind of develop a rough skin, but I feel like at first it's not easy.
No.
I'm a mom. I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. Like I feel like there's a lot of experiences now that I have, you know, uh, students or job seekers in their 20s. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that that was what was happening to me. But at that moment,
Hmm.
I knew that's not fair, and I would stand up for myself. And to this day, like, I remember I over the holidays I saw my family and my brother's like, well, he's like, I wouldn't say you're aggressive, but he did tell me, he's like, but when you don't like something, he's like, you're gonna say something. So he's
Hmm.
like, you're assertive. And I think in a lot of spaces, like we need to welcome that people should be able to say what's not right. And I think this is where the change happens, where managers need to be open to feedback.
Hmm.
It's not a criticism, it's actually feedback to help you grow as a manager. But I
Mhm.
think in a lot of spaces, sometimes people take it to like they put the emotion and they take it
Right,
personally. Where
right.
I'm like, I like you as a person, but I think as
Mhm.
a manager,
You're not
why
good.
don't we start off
Mhm.
like, I think what I tell people it's a good conversation to have is talk to your employee, understand, hey, what's the best way to communicate with you? What's the
Mhm.
best way for you to receive feedback? Because a lot of times, a lot of managers realize I can't use a cookie cutter for every person.
Right,
And just because
exactly.
this person received it this way doesn't mean this person will. And I think, especially for women of color, like I'm very laid back. It's I think my West Coast, like, let's have coffee. I love managers who are like, let's do a phone call or let's meet in person. That's going to open up the conversation
Hmm.
in so many different ways. Don't just talk about work, talk about what's going on in our lives. There's a lot of moms out there. Ask them, how are you doing? Because all those things are going to come up in the workplace.
Hmm.
And that's why a lot of us struggle because we think we have to fit this cookie cutter role. And the truth is, we can balance everything. It's just not going to look the same way as Chad or Tim or anyone else in our office, but we still
Mhm.
can hit those numbers. I'm telling you, I work with a lot of women of color. They hit those numbers all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we've made it very clear what's going on in the workplace and how imposter syndrome is playing out in the workplace and what are some of the issues that are occurring in the workplace that's contributing to that. We've made that clear. I think what I'm starting to hear from Bedilia are some things that managers can do, or how you can overcome imposter syndrome. And I think the first thing I heard was, you have a place here. Don't
Mm.
question. Don't, you're supposed to be here. You earned the stripes to be here. And I'm looking for some other examples of what people can do themselves. We understand what managers can do to help have that better conversation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking a lot of people who are listening today are saying, okay, well, maybe I'm not as, you know, forthcoming as Cristina, and I'm not so uh, clear, level-headed as Bedilia, and I have the courage to speak up. What do you say to those people? Like, what can
Yeah.
they do to just do something very small to start? Because I
Yeah.
think maybe a lot of people just don't don't have the place to be able to start.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start with this one, because I love this question. Again, imposter syndrome is a feeling. It's a feeling of inadequacy, a feeling of self-doubt, a feeling of not being quote unquote good enough for whom, right? So I really think people, it starts with building your sense of self and confidence. That's where it all begins. Because once you know who you are, once you know what you stand for and what your strengths and abilities are, no one can take them from you. Right. And
So
so
I'm gonna
yeah,
interrupt you for a second
sure.
and just take that a little bit further.
Yeah.
Did you take that first step by moving to Japan? Would you
Ooh,
say
that's a good
that
question.
was what you did to say, I really need to find out who I am?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is not why I went to Japan, although I wish that that was why I went to Japan. To be really honest with everyone in here, I wish I could say it was like a revelation in my own self in college that I was like, I'm going to go discover myself. It really,
No,
for
no,
me,
no, I didn't mean
ultimately,
it that. Yep,
yeah,
go ahead.
I think I know what you mean. But ultimately, for me, the reason I went to Japan is because during college, I studied abroad in Mexico. And I also went on a few service trips to other countries. And to be honest, I just became fascinated with learning about different
Hmm.
people, their culture, how different people live in other places, and how mindsets shift based
Yeah,
on where you live. So for me, my obsession with culture and inclusivity and learning about other people who are different from myself was a huge reason why I went to Japan.
sure.
That was my kind of drive, was like, I want to learn how someone on the other side of the world who has a completely different upbringing from me, a completely different language, a completely different culture, mindset, and everything. I'm fascinated to learn how they live, because
So would you say that that helped you
it
be
definitely
able
did.
to
It
feel like,
definitely
I
did.
do, I do belong. I know who I
Yeah.
am,
Yeah.
and I do belong.
Yeah. I think for me, one thing I do recommend for anyone in this space, anyone who's listening, who's feeling these self-doubt, this unworthiness, this feeling of exclusion, this feeling that you don't belong, is first and foremost, find a place where you do feel included. Find a space that you do feel like you belong, with people who are going to validate you, with people who maybe are like-minded with you, whether that's, joining an employee resource group at your company, if that exists. And if it doesn't, start one. Right, I'm happy to share tips on how to start
Sure.
that movement. Or if it's outside of work, maybe you're super into gardening, so join a community garden.
Hmm.
Right, maybe you're super into professional development, go to conferences, meet
Hmm.
other like-minded people, and find your tribe. So that would be the first step that I would say to
Step.
anyone
Yep.
in this space who's feeling imposter syndrome and doesn't know where to start. So first and foremost, find a psychologically safe space for you to feel included and
Hmm.
validated and accepted and supported. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, I would say, in terms of building your confidence, is, I love what Bedelia mentioned about the brag sheet. Keep a sheet of your own accomplishments for yourself. Literally anything that you've done or accomplished in the workplace, whether that's getting a new client or increasing the revenue of a product or whatever that looks like for you, keep track of those things and keep them for yourself, because you can use those at any point in your career, whether that's having a conversation with your manager and saying, hey, this is what I've contributed in the last 6 months to a year in this role. Or even if you leave and you go somewhere else, hey, this is what I contributed in my last organization and what I can continue to contribute here. Right. So again, it comes with this sense of certainty, of something tangible that you can speak to. So it doesn't feel like you're kind of just pulling things out of thin air, but this is actual action power moves that you've made for yourself. And when you keep them on a piece of paper, not only does writing them down also feel empowering, because when you write something down, it's just
there.
more ingrained. It's there, right? It's ingrained in your mind, and like you put it on a piece of paper and it's this real tangible thing that you can speak to. So I really recommend finding your tribe, whether that's in the workplace or outside. And if it's not in the workplace, find it outside of the workplace. And then secondly, keeping your own list of accolades and accomplishments for you, for your own self, to be like, you know what, the days that I'm feeling bad about myself, or the days that I'm feeling really low, I'm going to look at this list of all the amazing accomplishments that I've had and remind myself who I am. Right. So that's what I would say just to start with. I don't know if Bedilia has anything to add, but
I actually have two. So one of the things that comes to mind that I actually started is when you're in a workspace, I think for a lot of us, the imposter syndrome comes with what Cristina said. We feel excluded. Like, I don't look like this person. How can I relate to you? You know, we don't have the same background. We don't have the same skin tone. And I realized that one of the things I learned was stepping out of my comfort zone. And they talk about inclusivity as, you know, being invited to the party, but no one is asking you to dance. So what I challenge a lot of us to do is, why are we waiting to be asked to dance? Why don't we ask the other person first? So for me, I would make it a point when I transition to tech to get to know the other people on my team. You know, they do team building events, but there's times when you can go have coffee with someone, when you can have lunch with someone. And I think being open to the experience, I think to similar to Christina's point, you know, I attended a public university where it was very competitive. And I think when I was put in these circles where people who didn't look like me when I was on team partners, I remember there was this one young lady, there was three of us that were, you could say we identified as underrepresented and not as, you know, two Asian and one Latina, and this beautiful, gorgeous, 6 foot tall white girl who was also a model who we learned in the group. But she was extremely nice. She invited us to her place to do a team project. And I think that was the first time I realized, you know, sometimes it's easy to, you know, make assumptions about people because they don't look like us. But you'll probably discover maybe you like the same TV show. You probably enjoy the same activities. And I think once you start seeing people for the activities they do outside of work, you can actually engage with them and feel more comfortable. So for me, it was about breaking the ice and realizing, kind of like to Christina's point, like, I'm in a new territory, I'm in a new land. Where can I find common ground with some of the folks that I'm working with? Where can I find common ground with the 24-year-old white male who is from like the South that I probably have nothing in common with? And the truth is, we do, you know, have so much in common. And they're actually someone I could count on as an ally. For stuff outside of work, I would say challenge yourself. Like for me, I remember I used to run half marathons, used to take a new class. I remember I climbed Half Dome in, what do you call it, in
Utah?
Yosemite.
Yeah.
Yosemite. So I think once it doesn't always have to be work related. Like many women I know are doing exceptional things, like they're volunteering, they're doing things with their kids. Like, please bring that up in interviews, because that shows another part of yourself that to a manager, they're like, if you can do all this and you're not even getting paid, I can only imagine the things you can do. But for me,
Sure.
I think I set up personal goals where,
Mhm.
hey, I'm going to challenge myself to try this new activity. I know it's going to be scary, but I think once you start overcoming scary stuff, you're going to realize that doing something at work is less scary. So I'm
I
always a
agree.
big proponent of do that thing that scares you and makes you feel out of your comfort zone. And for some of us, that might just be like, I'm going to try this new fitness class. I'm not going to know anyone, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to stick to it for 6 months. Keep at it because it's going to make you grow, and you're going to realize if I can do this, I can do that next hard thing on my list.
Yeah.
And I do think also what's true is that uh, there's so many things, so many competing ideas or interests, or we're advertised to so many different ways,
Mhm.
and sometimes it just gets hard to choose, or we do choose. So for those of us who struggle with that and have a hard time trying to figure out how do I find my tribe, or I tried this tribe and they weren't really that great and I'm just going to stop. What do you
Mhm.
guys say to that? Like getting the stick to itiveness, or just getting yourself up off the ground and being able to say, yep, it didn't work for me, I got to move on. What do you guys
Yeah.
suggest to do, how people can, because it takes time to find your
Oh yeah.
tribe
Oh
and
yeah.
find out what you like. You got to try lots of different things until
Yeah.
you find out what you like.
I'll start with this just because this is like my favorite thing in the world. Um, so I love what Bedilia mentioned about challenging yourself and trying something new, because essentially, absolutely everything that you do in life, you had to start somewhere, right? Like everything. Even when we first started walking, we didn't walk. We were like wobbling and like drunk people, like falling all over, but we didn't stop. We didn't just go, well, I don't know how to walk, so I'm not gonna walk anymore, like, right? So for me, it's what I recommend. It might be hard to find your tribe, and it may take several attempts, and you may have to go to different events and different try different groups out until you find the right one for you. But I always recommend for people to, in order to grow, you have to be uncomfortable,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so nothing grows in comfort. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable in a space, it's because it's forcing you to grow.
Hmm.
And you can make the decision, do I want to grow in this space, or maybe find another space where I can grow, right?
Sure.
And so I love that idea of really challenging yourself. And it doesn't always have to be something professionally. It could
Yep.
be running a half marathon and you're like, you know what? I've never done this before. When I first start running, I'm probably going to be pretty bad. I'm probably going to have to stop
Yep.
every mile to take a breather, right? But at the end of the day, if you keep at it and it's something that's giving you energy, right? I
Hmm.
always say to my clients, what brings you energy? What brings you joy? And do more of that,
I
right?
agree. I
And
agree.
figure that out for yourself, because that's different for every single person. We are all unique. So what brings you, Clifford, energy might not bring me energy. What might bring Bedilia energy, but like we're all very different. But what I think that cultivates more than anything, and trying different things out and seeing what you like and what you don't like, first and foremost, everything is a learning opportunity. If
Sure.
it's something
We're
you
always
didn't like,
learning. We're
exactly. If
always
it's
learning.
something you didn't like or didn't work well, okay, well, now I know I don't really like that. So I'm not going to do that anymore, but let me try this. But what I
Exactly.
think that cultivates more than anything, and that's something I really pride myself on, because I love trying different things. I love experimenting with different
He
ideas and
does.
projects and groups. I really do. Bedelia knows. I do all the things. And for me, what that cultivates is a growth mindset. And
Yes.
that's really the mindset that you need in order to thrive, in order to be okay with feeling like an imposter because something's new. And you're like, you know what?
Exactly.
I'm okay with sucking at this right now because it's new. But if I like it, I'm going to put my mind to it. I'm going to be determined. I'm going to keep practicing until I don't suck at it, until I'm great at it.
Exactly.
And that can be used in the workplace too. You can say, if you're a new, let's say, customer success manager, just putting it out there, say you're brand new to the role, you've never done it before, you are not going to be great at it at the beginning. And
You might
being
have you
okay
might have
with,
the skill set to be able to
yeah,
learn it and develop it and grow.
exactly. But
Exactly.
you're not going to be the best CSM when you first
Ever.
start off as a CSM. And that's okay. And being okay with that and saying, you know what? I'm okay with not being the best. but I know that I can get there.
Exactly.
Right? And that's really where those feelings of the imposter syndrome dissipate, when you're okay with being not great at something, but
Mhm.
knowing and believing in your ability to work hard at it and become great.
And then I think
That's a
we've
good point.
covered a lot of runway here
Yeah.
in helping us manage imposter syndrome. One area we have not touched on, and that is what you brought up in the beginning when we talked about can you describe imposter syndrome? And
Mhm.
you spoke about why imposter syndrome makes you feel like you don't belong.
Mm.
And that is very difficult for people who are coming into an environment when they look different or they act different or speak
Mhm.
different.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit of your thoughts about what does belonging mean and w- why does it matter? Why does it matter so much?
Mhm.
And why do feelings like belonging matter?
Um, so I'll answer this question. I think for me, uh, a lot of this topic, because I have a 17-year-old who is trying to figure out what he wants to do in this world. And I think the one thing that we recognize as humans is having a place to fall back on. And belonging, when you think of belonging, it's your family, your tribe, right? No matter what happens in life, who you become, when you don't um, reach that goal, they're always going to be there to support you. And I think it's that place where you can be yourself and realize I can be vulnerable. um, that's why belonging matters, because as humans, to Christina's point, we're not going to know everything from the get go. It's going to take a learning curve. But, when you think about when you were small and, you were learning how to ride your bike, or maybe you were making the transition from elementary to middle school and high school, it was rough, right?
Hmm.
I know with my son, I see him. One of the things I taught him is, all I ask you to do is stick with it. And if you never want to do this activity again, you don't have to do it. And he
Sure.
expressed to me, Mom, I think that was the best advice, because now I've had exposure to different things and now he's more open to sticking with it. And
Hmm.
I think that's why belonging is really crucial in the workplace, because I think it's very easy for someone to say, you know what, I want to quit. You know, this is not working. I don't think I even belong. There was a point in my life where I thought, I don't think I could ever, I'm not a good recruiter. And the truth is, now I do recruitment part time, and people are like, you're a great recruiter. But
Hmm.
I wasn't in a supportive environment where I felt that.
Yeah.
And when you belong, you're going to have someone on your team who's going to remind you you're still learning.
Yeah.
You That's okay. Let's work together to get you to where you need to be at. And I think that's where you having your own idea of success and what it looks like. So,
Right.
to Christina's point, growth mindset. Okay, maybe in 3 months, you're not going to be maybe the best manager, but take it in baby steps and realize, in 1 year, I know I can achieve more than what I know now. But you
Sure.
need that place where you could fall back on, and that person is going to accept you and realize, let's work together and not hold these high expectations for you, but meet you where you're at. That's what belonging looks to me like, where I'm going to have a manager who's going to respond and recognize, she's here and I know she can go there. I'm going to work with her right now
Hmm.
because she's going to be able to get here, but this is where she's at and I need to meet her right here.
And I think what you're also saying, sorry, Christina, just to give you, before you
Yeah.
answer, I think what you're also saying is that belonging has a lot to do with being able to speak to somebody about how you're feeling. And you guys
Very
mentioned
true.
that earlier on, is that a lot of the time when you were experiencing imposter syndrome, you didn't have anybody around you who looked like you or was experiencing the same thing as you to speak to them about. And I think there's a link between belonging in your tribe and helping you get through that difficult time that you're going through it.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Christine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I 100% agree with everything Bedelia said. I would just add, for me, at the end of the day, human beings, we're social by nature, right? Like we have to have support in order to survive. I mean, people who are excluded or alienated or ostracized, like they don't do well in society or life.
Mhm.
Like, a lot of these mass
Or
shootings
animals.
and things that we're seeing are people who have been alienated and don't belong. And that actually has a mental and physical effect on a human being. So belonging is psychological safety, is feeling safe, is that feeling of, hey, even if I mess up, I'm safe here. Or even if I don't really know what's next for me, I can rely on someone,
Mhm.
right? And so it's really a psychological feeling of safety, and we all need that.
Mhm.
And if we don't have it in the workplace, I'll tell you all right now, and I've worked with hundreds, hundreds of women of color who are professional women of color in the workspace. And, the number one reason women leave their roles is because they don't feel safe. They
Mhm.
do not have psychological safety in the workplace. And when you do not have that feeling of safety or belonging in the workplace, you cannot show up as your most powerful,
Mhm.
authentic self. And if you are
Or
always
productive.
repressing or productive, and
Mhm.
if you aren't always repressing your authentic self, right? You're not allowing yourself to flourish and really reach your maximum potential because you're always holding yourself back, right?
Sure.
And so belonging is so crucial in the workplace because we all want to have the best companies. We want to make the most money, right? We want to be the most, return on investment, all that stuff. But if your employees don't feel their best and don't feel their most supported and don't feel like they can really show up as their authentic selves, and when I mean authentic, I mean coming up with innovative ideas, right? Coming up with maybe challenging the ways things are done and coming up with a better way of doing things, right? At the end of the day, if we're not allowing our employees to show up in that way, you're not going to get the best performance out of that employee.
Mhm.
And so inclusivity and belonging is so essential in the workplace for that reason. And for people also to just feel like they can be vulnerable, like they can be safe, like they can make a mistake and it doesn't mean they're going to get fired tomorrow,
Right.
right? And so it really goes hand in hand with just the human experience of wanting to feel safe and included. And we all need that. And if we could all have that in the workplace, I guarantee you your employees will produce so much more. They will be so much happier. They will stay, right? There won't be as much turnover and crazy, issues with retention because people will feel heard, they will feel valued, they will feel respected, and they will feel safe. And that's all everybody wants.
So let me throw out a scenario at you guys just before we start to wrap up. You are in whatever, you're in the hallway
Hmm.
of, doesn't matter the organization, you could be in a manufacturing company, whatever. You're in the hallway and it doesn't matter your role or what you do there. You walk up to two people who are having a conversation and you join the conversation because you're included and you're asked questions and so on and so forth. And then suddenly, one of the people in the group says something or acts in a way that creates or sets an environment of an unsafe, not psychologically safe environment.
Hmm.
With the two professionals who are here with me today, how would you handle that situation right there and then?
Well, I can go. I because I've had this happen before. um, so for me, I believe in calling people in, not necessarily calling people out. And so for me, if it was maybe a comment that was inappropriate, So let's say, for example, someone said, "Oh, Christina's being the spicy Latina that she is,"
Exactly.
whatever
Yeah.
it may be. Instead of getting extremely defensive, what do you mean by that? What's spicy? I would more so just say, well, I would ask, what exactly do you mean by that? In a non-defensive way, just a very matter of fact, what was the intention behind that comment? And to be honest, when I asked that at the time, the person did not know how to respond. They were taken aback. I don't even think they realized how offensive it was
Sure.
what they had said.
Exactly.
And they really kind of were like, I just mean that you're like really outspoken. And I'm like, okay, well, why can't you just use the adjective of outspoken and not spicy? Because spicy, just so you know, has a very negative connotation for me because I am Latina and we eat spicy food. And I don't know, like, am I supposed to be a jalapeno pepper? Like, I don't know, right? And so I think really being sincere and asking someone their intention behind why they said something will actually get them to think like, oh, well, why did I say that? Or what did I mean by
or maybe they didn't even realize what they were
maybe
saying.
didn't even realize that could be something offensive, but it's a learning opportunity. So instead of, screaming and getting upset, I'm going to HR or whatever, but actually having a genuine conversation and asking someone, why did you think using the word spicy was appropriate? Just something as simple as that. You will be surprised at how people, they don't even think sometimes before they speak, and they may be like, oh wow, I didn't even realize that could be taken in that way. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, Bedilia? How would you handle it?
Similar to Cristina, it's a teachable moment. I think naturally as humans we want to react, but I think I see it more like from my anthropological background, like, well, what do you mean? Because I think I realize that's the thing. Sometimes we don't have a common language, and some people assume, well, when I say this, I mean this. So I think this has come up when we're dealing with different markets. And I remember people having assumptions about reaching out to like students in campus recruitment and assuming, oh, this student isn't excited, or the student isn't a good candidate compared to another one. And for me, it's like, tell me more about what that means, because first of all, our own biases being put on this person. And
They
even
get
in
in
the
the way.
workplace, yeah, and even in the workplace, if someone mentions, oh, I feel like you're being this towards me, combative, it's like, can we? I've had instances where I'm like, I think we should sit down and talk about this. And I know for a lot of folks that can seem scary and uncomfortable, but for me, it's like, if we're going to continue to work together and I like the role I have in my company, I want to know that I can speak to my colleagues and actually have a discussion
Right.
so that we can move forward, because I also want to recognize that I'm working with someone who can take feedback. And if I ever made a comment that was out of context, they could actually have a conversation with me and pull me back and be like, actually, let's talk about that. I think it's more about the growth mindset. Like, you're going to see this play again. If you don't nip it in the bud, what I find is this is going to occur often and often. And there comes a point where you realize, no, this is a teachable moment, because I wouldn't want someone else to experience this. And I also don't want my colleague going around saying this. Let's step in and let's talk about it, and let's get on the same page.
Great. All right. Well, we're at almost at the hour. Just before we close, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for sharing your personal stories and giving some highlights on what people can take away. I'd like to just open it up if there are any specific questions that folks in the audience want to ask Cristina or Bedilia. Now would be the time to do it, and let us know what you're thinking, and we'd be happy to answer specifically about how they would respond to the questions. While people are
I
okay,
have one
go ahead.
really quick thing, really
Yeah,
quick.
go.
I saw this video recently. It's a TEDx video. I can like send it in the chat too. It was a really cool concept that this company of this concept of the purple flag. It was called, I don't know if you've seen that video, but
Mhm.
essentially it's like when you're in a meeting, if someone says something that is like not politically correct or inappropriate, instead of just saying, hey, you know, that was inappropriate, there's actually a structure built within this organization that they say, hey, purple flag, purple flag.
Yep.
And they actually have a discussion out in the open, like, why was that comment inappropriate? So instead of people getting defensive and being like, oh, well, I didn't mean to say that, they're just like, okay, we understand that this was offensive to someone. Now let's unpack it and move forward. And it was really just like a simple process that they had that worked very well for them. And it was a really cool thing to see. So it's just something to think about, that like we can have these open conversations if we create a culture around it, around
that supports
around feedback, right? Around being open to growing and learning and adjusting, and not just fully just getting defensive like immediately, right? So just wanted to put that out there.
No, that's wonderful that you suggested that, because what you're talking about is behavior. And I think what's important to recognize is people have to feel comfortable being able to speak out against improper behavior. And then people in the organization need to be able to support when they see it. And then they need to learn how to change that behavior. And that's what that moment is doing with the purple flag, where people have an opportunity to speak up and learn why it was inappropriate and change mindset and change behavior. So I think that was really,
and
really
normalize
great.
it. And that's what it really did too. It normalized it. It was like, oh, purple flag. Everybody's like, oh, that's the purple flag. You know? Yeah.
All right. I'll ask the last question before we call it a day.
Okay.
Social media and its impact on the imposter syndrome phenomenon, specifically in the workplace, because we're keeping this conversation in the workplace. Any thoughts or comments on that?
I mean, I feel like social media has been positive. I think it's highlighting some voices. Like some person that I bring to mind is Minda Harts. She wrote a couple of books on being a woman of color and, you know, how to make space in business or corporate environments. But I feel like it has given an opportunity, like TikTok, Instagram, for women of color to actually highlight what's going on. I subscribe to some IG channels where I think it's called Cage Bird.
Oh yeah, I love that one on IG. Yeah.
Well,
HR.
she'll like bring up topics that we commonly have in the workplace, and we're like, oh wow, I didn't realize like this is how I can maneuver it. I will say maybe like TV and programming, there is still some stereotypes there that we have ways to grow. But I think this is where looking at alternate media like podcasts, there's some podcasts I subscribe to where there's discussions about what does it mean or how do you deal with these situations at work. Small Doses with Amanda Seals, I really love it.
I love Small Doses.
She talked about this concept of how to be soft, because in many cultures being soft, many of us feel like we're going to be seen as not strong.
Weak.
But
Yes, weak.
So I would say, for me, looking at alternate forms of media, asking other women when you do see someone in your tribe, hey, what are you listening to? What do you recommend I read? Because besides Oprah, there's so many amazing women who are using these platforms to share their stories. So for me, I would say look into alternate media, but I do feel like general mainstream TV and, you know, movies has a long way to go, because they still popularize, you know, what it looks like to be a leader, and that's usually male and white and straight.
Well, the good thing about mainstream TV and movies is that I think we've crossed over the 50% threshold where most people are cutting the cord. And so they can choose what they want to watch, and they can decide what they want to stream. So, all right, folks. We
can I add one tiny thing? I know we're at time. Can I add one tiny thing?
Of course
it'll be
you
quick.
can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So it's about social media. So the reason that I I have a lot of thoughts about social media, but I do think some of the positive sides of social media, especially for people who are feeling the imposter syndrome, is that it's shedding a light that this is an experience that a lot of people are going through. So if anything, it's showing people that you're not alone, that there are many, many other people experiencing this. And I think that makes people feel validated and makes people feel more included, right?
Mm-hmm.
And less alone and alienated. So I think that's one positive aspect. And then the other positive aspect, especially referring back particularly to the George Floyd situation,
Yep.
was that it gave a voice to the people. And it has given a voice to people who have been historically marginalized and underrepresented, and it's giving them the power. Because I will tell you, most of this DEI work and workshops and these companies spending money on DEI resulted because of the public going on social media and making George Floyd's case such a big deal and showing
Exactly.
people that this is not okay. We're not going to stand for this. And if a company is not on board with creating more equity and justice in this world, then we want nothing to do with them. So it really did give strength and voice to people who have been historically marginalized and underrepresented, and also has shown other people that you're not alone in this fight. And so I do see the positive aspects. There's obviously a lot of negative too, but that's the positive side of social media that I see happening.
Well, thank you, Cristina, for ending us on a really positive light. I think that's great. Both of you, thank you so much for your comments and your feedback. This was a great podcast. It was great to hear your personal stories and share some tangible tools for people to take away from today. So thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
I appreciate all the people who participated on the podcast today. So thank you all, and happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Thank you,
Thank you for having
Clifford.
us.
Take care.
Have a great week, folks. Take
Thank you.